Hey guys, welcome. Give it a minute and we'll go ahead and get started.
Good afternoon, Brad. How are you?
Hey, good. How are you guys doing? All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. JC and Miguel are on, so from White Rock Lending Services. So as promised before, I'm going to just kind of turn it over to them real quick and see if they have any words of wisdom to impart to the team today. So JC or Miguel, go for it.
Yeah, hey guys. Thank you, Brad. Miguel's going to go ahead and share something here in a second. I just had just a brief story to share. I posted it on Facebook, but wanted to share it here in case nobody saw it. But the story I shared was my son and his girlfriend were at the park this past week on Sunday, and a gentleman had approached them. My son and his girlfriend are 18 years old, right? They're very young. And a gentleman had approached them and started talking to them about real estate. And, pretty much along the lines of encouraging them and telling them about real estate, how they could do it, what the process was, handed them a business card. And, my son came home and started asking a bunch of questions like, Dad, is this true? I'm only 18. What do I need to do? I don't even have a job, and all kinds of stuff. So anyway, I found that fascinating, wanted to share it here because number one, it takes courage. I mean, what that real estate agent did took a lot of courage. And what I got out of it was just talking to an 18-year-old and getting them excited about the opportunity of home ownership made me excited, I actually reached out to that agent and told him he did a great job for what it was worth. So I wanted to share it here and whether, hopefully you guys find that encouraging.
Yeah, thanks, JC. Talk to everybody. Doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah, exactly. And then Miguel's going to do a little something different today. I don't think we've ever done this, but he's going to go ahead and share some pricing and how that works. So I'll let you have it, Miguel.
Hey, Brad. Hey, everyone. Happy Thursday. So just wanted to share with you guys a little bit about how we price loans. Particularly, I'm going to go over an FHA loan and a conventional loan. And if there's any questions, feel free to ask away. I'm going to share my screen. I can do that.
Yeah.
Brad, is that okay? All right.
Yeah, you should be able to. Yep.
Okay, great. So these are going to be the scenarios that I'm going to be working. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Yep, go for it.
Okay. So FHA, 620 credit score, 400 purchase price, 3.5 down. And then I'm also going to show you a conventional loan, 680 credit score, 400,000 purchase price, 3% down. So that you guys kind of have an idea as to what rates are doing at this present time. So let me first go with the FHA here. And I'll go ahead and do the 400 purchase price, 3.5% down, the 620 credit score. Then I'll go ahead and use I'm gonna show you guys the rates right now with FHA based on a 620 credit score. So you can see based on that credit score, the rate is 625. There's different lenders that we can work with. We try to target the one closest to 100. If for some reason we have to go with any different lender, then that means that the difference, I don't want to get too granular on this, but it just means that the client would have to pay the difference. So we try to do a par pricing so that the client doesn't have to bring any additional costs. So in this case, best case scenario would be American Financial Resources to go with that interest rate of 6.625 based on that 620 credit score. I'm going to change this a little bit with a different credit score to see what rates do. I'm going to change it to 680.
And
That
Miguel,
6.625.
I'm
Go ahead.
going to interrupt real quick. So obviously that rate at 6.6, you know, that was different from what I posted this morning at 5.5%. I posted a scenario on Facebook as well, but the difference was mine was at 680. And I just want to point that out. The difference between 680 and 620 credit scores are almost an entire point difference. So the scenario may be different, but that's why the credit scores are extremely important. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yes, so this one is with the 680 credit score, and yeah, that's in fact a 5.5 right now with FHA. So yeah, that seems accurate. 680 and over would be at 5.5. So obviously, the higher the credit score, the lower the interest rate. I'm going to move to a different scenario here. That would be conventional. So if we look at conventional with the 680 credit score and 3% down, let's see what we get. So see the difference there, 7.125. So FHA is obviously going to give us better rates. And you also have the mortgage insurance if you're over 80% financing, which shows you right here. That's the approximate mortgage insurance. So you can kind of see what the principal and interest payment would be and the mortgage insurance based on that same purchase price. And I don't know if you guys noticed what the mortgage insurance was for the FHA. So right now on conventional is $391 for FHA on the same credit score. That's because I need to change this to 96.5. So there's the mortgage insurance right there, 272. So that kind of gives you an overview of what conventional and FHA payments look like at the different rates.
Yeah, so the reason why we're doing this today is just to kind of, I doubt very much that you guys have maybe ever seen how a mortgage rate and quotes are actually done. And so because we are a mortgage brokerage, all the companies on the left-hand side are all companies, and some are wholesale. I see a Fairway Mortgage down there somewhere too, but those are all going to be companies that are going to lend based on the criteria that's in that row. And as Miguel said, unless the client wants to come out of pocket, and the conventional loans is a better illustration of that, because if they wanted a lower interest rate, they could get that, but they'd have to come out of pocket and buy down that rate. And so it just goes to show you what levers exist to give two different people completely different rates based on what their situation is, be it percentage down, be it credit score. But what you're looking at here, although all the rates are primarily the same, just simply illustrate, and I've seen it where it's not. So just picture those rates not being completely the same. But the benefit of a mortgage brokerage is that there will be scenarios where they're not all the same, and the customer has the choice to choose whatever rate and payment plan they want based on that lender's criteria. So if you were just going through a Wells Fargo or Bank of America or even Fairway, those rates are, and that criteria is going to be what it is. There's no flexibility. So we just kind of wanted to give you guys some insight into how your clients are going to get, are going to arrive at certain rates. So like JC said, it doesn't take much in terms of a credit score to, 620 versus 680, I think the example was, for it to make a very material difference.
Yep.
Yeah, conventional was a little bit different on the interest rates. There we go.
Yeah, big difference.
7.125, 7 even, 6.5. To the right of that is what they would have to come out of pocket to get that rate. So they either buy it down now and get a lower monthly payment, or don't write a check for anything, and they're left with 7.125.
Yep. And again, the point of this exercise is just to show you guys what it looks like. That's all. Somebody have a question? I thought I heard something.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Anything else?
That is it. We're going to keep
That's
it
it.
short and sweet.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So before we move on to contracts and timelines and all that good stuff, some of you may have seen that JC and I were in Houston on Tuesday night and had a little meet and greet with our agents there in Houston, co-sponsored by Allegiance Title. So we are going to plan more of those, not only in Houston, but also in all the other cities that we're in. So between now and the next 60 to 75 days, we'll be doing the same thing wherever you guys are. So just look for the invites to come out. It's a great way to kind of meet everyone face to face. I think that was the biggest takeaway, that although we all interact on these calls, it's different when you're in person. So so look for the invites there. So today I wanted to take some time to talk about time and how it relates to the contract process. So we're going to review 3 contracts, and I think one of the things that causes a lot of anxiety amongst us as realtors is that there are a lot of due dates in these contracts. And even though the contract is between 2 separate parties, not us, we're responsible for keeping these folks on track. And it goes far beyond when earnest money and option fees are due. And so I took the liberty of going through some of the more common contracts that we use. And I want to go through today and highlight where anything related to a due date or a time-sensitive task is. Now, the good news is that this was actually a good exercise for me, because it forced me to go through the contract and highlight in yellow where those things were. And so I'm going to, after the end of the meeting, send out the email with the link for the meeting, of course, as I always do, but I'm going to include these contracts in there. And I would download them and print them off so that you can, unless you're absolutely sure of when all these are, you can have them as a reference in terms of when all these are. So let's take a look at, so all that to say that you're going to get a hard copy of this, and you're going to be able to look at a glance where these things are. So don't feel like you have to take a ton of notes or commit this to memory on this call. But some of the things are directly a due date, and some things just talk about general time-sensitive obligations. So we're going to start with the 1 to 4 family, and on the first page is where I want to start. And the first one speaks to whether or not there are leases within the contract. And I've highlighted, it says, except as disclosed in this contract, seller is not aware of any leases affecting the property. Okay, so this would be, there aren't any. Okay, however, it does say after the effective date or the executed date, whatever vernacular you want to use, seller may not, without buyer's written consent, create a new lease, amend any existing lease, or convey any interest in the property. So this speaks to when the contract gets executed. If you represent the seller, that is going to be a big no-no. All right, if they enter into a lease or change anything regarding leases after that contract is executed. If you represent the buyer, obviously it's equally as much of a no-no, and that person is going to need to be advised. Okay, but it strictly says that can't happen. So let's move down and see, look at an example as if there were a lease, and in this case, it would be a natural resources lease. So what is that? That's going to be, as it says here, gas, mineral, water, wind, other natural resource leases affecting the property to which the seller is a party. I will tell you that most of the questions that I ever get asked about the contract, the answer is in the contract. And I know that if you're like me, you probably know that, and you second guess yourself as to what, whether or not your answer is correct. But if you read these enough times, the answer will eventually just jump off the page for you. So in this example, on the natural resources lease, if you check box C2, seller has not delivered to buyer a copy of all natural resource leases. So this assumes that there is one, whether it be for solar, wind, mineral rights are the most common one. Okay, about 15 years ago, a bunch of these companies that are now out of business went and secured mineral leases on most of our properties in Texas. And so chances of you owning what is beneath the ground of your structure is slim. Okay, so this speaks to that. If there is such a lease, where is it? And it goes on to say, seller shall provide to buyer a copy of all the natural resource leases within 3 days after the effective date. Buyer may terminate the contract, and they should put based on what they find within however many days you put in there. That's a blank, that white spot that you put in X amount of days. After the date, the buyer receives all those leases, and the earnest money will be returned to the buyer. Okay, not the option fee, because that's something totally different. Okay, but if there is a lease, they have to deliver it to you within 3 days. From that date, the buyer has the right to get out of the contract based on what they find. So maybe they were under the impression that there were no leases. Well, this would be a great time to exit out if that were the case. So as I've mentioned before, it's just my running joke. I am colorblind, and in certain cases, what I thought I was highlighting in yellow is probably green. So you can all laugh to yourselves. It's a cross I bear, but just FYI. So the next one is one that we're probably all very familiar with. When is the earnest money due? When is the option fee due? So the lines that I have highlighted speak to that. So within 3 days after the effective date, buyer must deliver to XYZ title company a certain amount of money along with the option fee. So if today's the 14th, and they have 3 days to do it, as it says here, when is it due? And the winner will get a $500 gift card to Blockbuster Video. You just have to buy the airfare to get to Bend, Oregon, because that's the only one that is in existence anymore. So if today's the 14th and they have 3 days to do it, when is the last day and time they have to get that in? Come on, you're smarter than that. Today's the 14th, they got 3 days. Nobody? So it's going to be technically the 17th, but the 17th is a Sunday. So it is going to be due Monday. Okay? Monday at 5 p.m. or at the close of business. All right? If you are in a situation where you're delivering additional earnest money, it also speaks to that within X amount of days after the effective date of this contract. So if there are 2 rounds of that earnest money delivery, make sure you're counting the days correctly. All right, so again, one of the more important ones that we're probably all familiar with, termination option. For nominal consideration, the receipt of which seller acknowledges the buyer's agreement to pay the option fee within the time required. Seller grants buyer the unrestricted right to terminate the contract by giving notice of termination to the seller within however many days after the effective date of this contract. Okay, that is the option period. And it says specifically it's due by 5 p.m. That notice is due by 5 p.m. local time on that day. This is the section that has nothing to do with whether or not that last day is a holiday. So if we put in the option period of 7 days and the 7th day is Christmas, it doesn't matter. That termination option notice is due. And then it goes on to say what happens if that isn't the case. Failure to timely deliver earnest money. If buyer fails to deliver the earnest money within the time required, seller may terminate this contract or exercise seller's remedies under paragraph 15, which is the I'm going to sue you paragraph. So a lot of agents are in situations where a buyer will get under contract, it's executed, earnest money and option fee has not been delivered yet because we're still within the 3 days, and the buyer changed their mind before that money is delivered. Is it still due? Yes, it is. If they don't deliver it, even though they've already made up their mind, they're in breach of the contract, which is what paragraph C speaks to. So whether or not in my example, the buyer wants to proceed or whether or not they knew on day one they didn't want it, it's still due. Okay, sometimes the title company and the seller's agent will get together and say, well, you don't need to deliver the earnest money. I'm not going to cash a check only to turn around and give it back to you. But the option fee is a sunk cost. Once the executed date is on there, it's countersigned, that money's gone. All right, and then lastly, it actually says in bold, whenever you see anything in our TREC contracts that are in bold, it's a big deal. It says time is of the essence for this paragraph and strict compliance with the time for performance is required. Okay. Moving on, commitment. This speaks to paragraph 6, title policy and survey. This is a kind of a big deal. All this stuff is, I guess, but this is glossed over because realtors don't realize that this paragraph exists. It says commitment. Within 20 days after the title company receives a copy of this contract, seller shall furnish the buyer a commitment for title insurance. So how many days does the title company have from the executed date to make good on this requirement? Answer 20 days. So this business of it's a cash buyer, I want to close in 7 days, you know, that all may be fine, but the contract gives the title company 20 full days to get that title commitment. Now that's if it's clean. So what if on the 19th day, your buyer gets that title commitment and there's a bunch of stuff on it, and this is a cash buyer and they wanted to close 5 days ago? Well, now you got problems. Well, do you? Not really, because the title company has 20 days to get that. Okay, now most are more expeditious than 20 days. But when you as agents start getting pressured to close quickly, just know the title company has 20 days to get a title commitment. And if you represent your buyer the way you should, they need to exercise the 21 days that I always recommend to get lender approval. Anything can happen. Okay, anything can happen. So it says if the commitment and exception documents are not delivered to the buyer within the specified time, the time for delivery will be automatically extended up to 15 days or 3 days before the closing date, whichever is earlier. If the commitment and exception documents are not delivered within the time requested, buyer may terminate this contract and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. So it is the title commitment in conjunction with exception documents that will also come from the title company. Those are the town of Austin, city of Austin has an easement for electricity. HOA has an easement for whatever. The telephone company has an easement they got to get to their equipment that's on this property. Those are exceptions the title company will never cover, but you've got to be made aware of those. Those are what's in the exception documents. Okay, so similarly is the survey. So you're going to choose one of 3, okay, within X amount of days after the effective date. Either the seller has one and they're going to give you one, or they don't have one and that's option 2. The buyer's going to get it. Or seller doesn't have one and option 3 is the seller is going to get it. But these days matter. So if they already have it, I'd give them 3 days to get it to you. If nobody has it and one has to be ordered, I would do 21 days. Okay, the more rural the property, the longer I would give them. Maybe it's 25 or 28 days. Okay, so what happens when that survey comes back? Let's talk about that in objections paragraph D. If there are objections to anything above and beyond this 6A 1 through 9, or what you'd put here, which is typically single family residence, buyer must object earlier of the closing date or X amount of days after the buyer receives the commitment. I always recommend 3 days. Okay, so it then goes on to say, provided seller is not obligated to incur any expense to fix anything wrong here, it says seller shall cure any timely objections of the buyer or any third-party lender within 15 days after the seller receives the objections, which is now known as the cure period. Now notice it says, provided the seller isn't obligated to incur any expense. The most common objection that comes up on a survey is, my neighbor's fence is a foot on my property that I want to go by. Well, the seller may be on the hook for moving that fence. Okay, so he's going to incur some expense. If the objections are not cured within the cure period, buyer may, by delivery notice to seller, this is where the timeline comes in, within 5 days after the end of the cure period. All right, and they can either terminate the contract and the earnest money gets refunded, or the buyer can just say, I don't care. You know, foot over my property, not on my property, I don't care. All right, but that's another key due date that based on something they're going to get is important for the buyer to know. All right. So let's go to property condition, paragraph 7. The only time this is a big deal is if the buyer doesn't get the seller's disclosure. So a lot of times it'll be included in the MLS listing. That counts as buyer has received the notice. Whether he or she physically has it, doesn't matter, it's available. So, but if it's not on there, you're going to choose paragraph 7B2. Buyer's not received it within X days after the effective date of this contract, seller shall deliver the notice to the buyer. And so I've mentioned this paragraph before. This is key, especially if the seller is pressuring the buyer for a very small option period. If that's the case and the buyer hasn't received the seller's disclosure, well, then you're in luck, because once they get the seller's disclosure, it says here, buyer can terminate the contract for any reason within 7 days after the buyer receives the notice or prior to closing, whichever occurs first, and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. So make sure you know what situation you're in. Seller's disclosure is on the MLS. Got to check box B1, but if it's not, let them pressure you all they want. For a shorter option period, you will always have a 7-day out once you receive that notice. Okay, that is a great thing to keep in your back pocket. All right. Talk about repairs. Completion of repairs and treatments. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, seller shall complete all agreed repairs and treatments prior to closing. Okay, this is a common question I get. Does it have to be done before the option period expires? No. The agreement to it does, but the completion of them, they have until the closing date. Now, unfortunately, that does not align with when you would logically want to do a walkthrough. So a seller, if they have a good seller's agent, they're going to say, get these things done by day 21. That gives you all a couple of days to walk through, make sure they're all done. If not, enough time before closing to get them done. Okay. All required permits must be obtained. Repairs and treatments must be performed by persons who are licensed to provide those repairs. If seller fails to complete any of the agreed repairs and treatments prior to the closing date, buyer may exercise remedies under paragraph 15 or extend the closing date for up to 5 days if necessary for seller to complete the repairs and treatments. So you cannot close if you want to as the buyer and sue the seller, or you can extend the closing date mutually up to 5 days for that person to get those things done. If it is a roof repair, that's major. You may just agree to extend the closing date to some random date that is beyond 5 days. If it is a leaky faucet, just extend it by up to 5 days and continue on. But that's another key due date. So the closing, the most significant date on the contract, in addition to the executed date. This date is sacred and cannot be moved. And that's really the only thing that I want to say. It does say the closing date of the sale will be on or before whatever date, or within 7 days after objections are made under paragraph 6D have been cured or waived, whichever date is later. If either party fails to close on the day of the closing date, the non-defaulting party may exercise the remedies contained in paragraph 15. So whenever someone says paragraph 15, that is, I'm going to sue you. Okay, but even in a market that's softening, the closing date has to be mutually agreed upon. And my guess is if the buyer wants to extend it, the seller is going to be resistant to doing that. Movers have been scheduled, plans have been made. It is a big deal. A big legal deal. All right, and then possession. Buyer's possession, seller shall furnish or deliver to the buyer possession of the property in its present or required condition, ordinary wear and tear accepted. And that's either when it closes or according to some kind of temporary residential lease, typically by the seller. All right. And then the second part of that is addresses smart devices. So be it a Ring doorbell, security system, internet access, anything like that. It says at the time seller delivers possession of the property to the buyer, seller shall deliver to buyer written information containing all access codes, usernames, passwords, and applications buyer will need to access, operate, manage, and control the smart devices. So to mind, for me, comes a garage door keypad that's on the external part of the door frame there. And it says terminate and remove all access to all connections to the improvements and accessories from any of the seller's personal devices, including but not limited to phones and computers. Okay, so they're going to want to do that anyway. But it does say, and I'm calling this out today because it simply says when that home is delivered to the new buyer. So if we already know that there's smart devices that this needs to happen with, you as the buyer's agent need to not wait until closing day to get these. All right, and then casualty law. So this is, I'm in a contract, I'm going to close on Friday, and on Thursday there is a hailstorm in which the property has been damaged. So if any part of the property is damaged or destroyed by fire or other casualty after the effective date of the contract, sellers shall restore the property to its previous condition as soon as reasonably possible, but in any event by closing date. Okay, so if seller fails to do that, due to factors beyond the seller's control, buyer may terminate the contract, earnest money is going to be refunded, or extend the time for performance up to 15 days, and the closing date will be accepted as necessary, or the buyer can just say, I'm closing on the day I want to close on. I don't care about the damage. I'm just going to accept it. So normally, if it's going to create a situation where it goes beyond the original closing date, both parties get together and reasonably work out when the closing date is going to be based on the repairs that need to be done. Usually if there's a willing buyer and a willing seller, the fact that there's a hailstorm is reasonable to think that that's going to be worked out. All right, so this is one that comes up every now and then, and this is under paragraph 18, paragraph C, and this usually rears its ugly head when emotion gets involved and someone doesn't sign the release of earnest money. And so it says, upon termination of the contract, either party or the escrow agent may send a release of earnest money to each party, and the party shall execute counterparts of the release and deliver same to the escrow agent. If either party fails to execute the release, so the release is the release of earnest money form. So if either party fails to do that, either party may make a written demand to the escrow agent for the earnest money. So I have seen this done. If only one party makes written demand, escrow agent shall promptly provide a copy of the demand to the other party. If escrow agent does not receive written objection to the demand from the other party within, here's the due date, 15 days, escrow agent may disperse the earnest money to the party making the demand, reduced by the amount of unpaid expenses occurred on behalf of the party receiving the earnest money, and escrow agent may pay the same to the creditors. So if there's $2,000 that's owed in earnest money, there still may be fees incurred, such as the survey, whatever, that may be deducted. I have never seen a title company take it upon themselves to do this, because by doing that, they're admitting who is entitled to it. And I know that it says that they can do it here, but I haven't seen one that ever will. All right, and then in paragraph D, damages. Any party who wrongfully fails or refuses to sign a release acceptable to the escrow agent within 7 days of receipt of the request will be liable to the other party for damages, the earnest money, and reasonable attorney fees and all costs of suit. All right, so that's when it kind of gets ugly and people start mediation or the legal process. Okay, and then the biggie is the executed date. All right, so if you represent the buyer, the seller agent is the one that fills this in. All right, and that is it for the 1 to 4. Any questions on any of those? Okay, let's look at the third-party financing addendum. So this is a brief 2-pager, but due dates do apply, and some are vague, some are not. So in the very first paragraph, it says, type of financing and duty to apply and obtain approval. This is not pre-qualification. This is the approval of the loan. Anybody can get a pre-qualification. And so, sorry, I do have a question. Who really orders the survey title? Is that the title company? Yes. Normally, the title company will do the order the survey if one does not exist. The contract just states who's going to pay for it. I would double check to make sure that that's happening. And if not, we have recommendations for companies that can do a survey. Okay. All right. So again, third-party financing addendum. A pre-qualification is nothing more than your buyer verbally telling a lender what their income and expenses are. And the lender says, okay, based on that, you're approved up to X amount of home. What we're talking about here is financing approval, which is when the lender says, okay, well, let's see how much of that is true. We're gonna open up, your books and verify paycheck stubs and credit score, and let's see if you can really be approved for the loan. That's what we're talking about here. So it says buyer shall apply promptly, there's that vague time frame, for all financing described below and make every reasonable effort to obtain approval for the financing, including but not limited to furnishing all information and documents required by buyer's lender. Builder contracts have a very similar statement, but I have seen buyers who really, they tell you that they want to go buy a home, they'll execute a contract, but their behavior suggests otherwise. They do not promptly apply for financing. They drag their feet. You've given them 21 days to get buyer approval or lender approval. They wait until day 20 and they wonder why they can't get the home. And the problem is they wait till day 20, and as you can imagine, that's usually because there's a skeleton in the closet and the buyer can't really buy the home they thought they could. They knew it all along. They just procrastinated. But now they're in a situation where they waited too long and they now can't get out of the contract. Okay, so at least by this means, so let's arrow down. Let's say it's a conventional loan. Paragraph 2, approval for the financing described above will be deemed to have been obtained when buyer approval and property approval are obtained. Time is of the essence. Here's another bold for this paragraph, and strict compliance with the time for performance is required. That's why you're going to always check paragraph 2A, which says this contract is subject to buyer obtaining buyer approval. If buyer cannot obtain buyer approval, buyer may give written notice to seller within, and I always recommend 21 days after the effective date of the contract, and this contract will terminate and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. Okay, so this is the way the normal process works. In a multiple offer situation, a seller may counter to you and say, can you make that 14 days? You're pushing it, but hopefully if the buyer knows that their credit score is already high and they're certain they're, going to get approval within 14 days, fine. But me personally, if it were my wallet, I would not go less than 21 days. Okay, but it does say if the buyer does not terminate the contract under this provision, the contract will no longer be subject to the buyer obtaining buyer approval. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this paragraph regarding property approval and lender approval and all that. And there is other due dates under property approval as well. So this has nothing to do with the buyer being financially able to purchase the home. It has to do with maybe lender required repairs, the appraisal not meeting the sales price, which is a common one. This is a biggie. So I apologize, I did not highlight this, but this is, so if that happens, if the appraisal comes in less and you didn't sign an appraisal waiver, the buyer can get out, but they need to deliver that notice no later than 3 days before closing date. Okay, and the lender is going to have to provide a written account of what happened. Okay, so those are all the due dates for a typical third-party financing addendum. Any questions? Okay, the last one is HOA. So if your property is in an HOA, consider yourself fortunate as it relates to the addendum, because all that it is in yellow is an out. Okay, so you're going to check one of 3 options in paragraph A, and it all relates to getting the HOA rules. So covenants, restrictions. Can I barbecue on my patio? Can I paint my house royal blue? Can I fly my US Marine Corps flag? Can I, heck, plant a tree? These are all deal breakers for people. And so paragraph A speaks to when I get those, how long am I going to allow that to happen, which is right here, right here. And then once I get them, how long do I have to read them and object? Okay. Sorry. And that's what all this paragraph is. Okay, and it's 3 days. Okay, so once the buyer receives it, they need to read it and make sure they have no issue. If they do, they have 3 days from when the buyer receives it to say, I'm out, and they will get their earnest money back. Okay, that's what all these paragraphs say, with the exception of material changes, which is if the version that buyer has received is 20 years old and some things have changed, the buyer has additional remedies. And it just says if seller becomes aware of any material changes in the subdivision information, seller shall promptly give notice to buyer. So what's the definition of promptly? Don't know. Buyer may terminate the contract prior to closing by giving written notice to seller if any of the subdivision information provided was not true, or any of the material adverse changes, or any material adverse change in the subdivision information occurs prior to closing, and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. So if the buyer is a car buff and he keeps a 57 Chevy that he just bought from the junkyard parked in his driveway, and he likes to work on it on the weekends, and all of a sudden that's changed over the years and the bylaws say he can't do that, that is going to be an out. for your buyer. Okay, so a couple of things as a buyer's agent, as it relates to the timelines, you need to be aware of. Seller's disclosure, HOA addendum, and title commitment and survey. This falls under the category of if this, then this. If based on this information, I see something that is going to be a deal breaker, then I have a timeline built in to get out or make a decision. Okay, and they're big things. For a lot of people, especially a first-time home buyer, they're big things. Okay, 95% of the time, it's not going to be an issue. But don't assume you're not working with a home that fits into that 5% of the time. Okay, so those are the biggies. Okay. All right, and I left out appraisal. That's another one. All right, so that's it. Any questions on that document or any of the others that I've reviewed? Okay. Hopefully you found that helpful. I know it's a little dry, but nonetheless, it provides value to our clients. So, so that being said, I'm gonna send these out to everybody along with the recording. Next week is our CE class, and I've sent out the flyer for how to sign up. I'll continue to send that out so you can pay and get credit. And even if you don't pay, you can still attend. So that's next week. So anyway, if anybody has any questions or anything else, they need to reach me. I am here. Otherwise, you guys have a great rest of the week, and we will talk to you later.